Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm looking at the time like 28 minutes, but we'll get it done. And we'll get it done. Yeah. So first off, I want to thank you all for being here, and we're on day 2. Today's half a day. I know it was a lot of content yesterday. And I'm here with my girl, my friend Anushay Hossain, who is a New York Times bestselling author and podcast host. But before we get started, I do want to take a moment of silence. You all may have heard our colleague Kelly Baden yesterday mentioned that there have been 2 Black women who have died as a result of Georgia abortion restrictions. So I want to just lift that up in the room this morning and have a moment of silence to honor them and their lives and the families they've left behind. Thank you all.
Great, thank you all. I am so excited to be here. And when Dr. Taylor says that I am her girl, I mean, I'm going to put that on my LinkedIn status as soon as I'm here. Welcome, everybody, but thank you so much for having me. I really just want to take a moment and just give a round of applause to Dr. Taylor because
Thank you,
I am so proud of her. She is the real deal. And honestly, IWPR could not be in better hands. So I know quite a little bit about your journey, but why don't you tell the audience about your journey and what brought you, how you ended up at IWPR?
Yeah, for sure. Well, one thing that I should acknowledge too is that IWPR has been around for a long time, almost 40 years. And you know, I remember first coming to Washington and having a job on the Hill. Also in grad school, I talked a little bit about that yesterday. And remember, you know, really deepening my work around women's issues and would look to IWPR for groundbreaking research to make the case, both for my boss at the time. I worked for Congressman Bobby Scott, who's still in Congress, still a member of Congress from the great state of Virginia. And always relied on IWPR's research and expertise when it came to making the argument for policies that support women, that grow the economic power of women. And so I've had a you know, sort of a love affair with the organization for a long time. And then I continued to work in the gender policy space over several roles. I won't get into all of them. But left the Hill as a mom of a young kid and was like, this is really hard doing this on the Hill. I give a shout out to the women and parents who are still on the Hill and doing it with small children, because it was really hard for me. I had challenges having support to breastfeed, to be honest, on the Hill, gruesome scheduling. So left there seeking opportunities to work in the policy advocacy space. And so in some ways I went from the side of, you know, a legislative staffer to a lobbyist. And so from there worked on HIV/AIDS issues, as I mentioned, gender equity issues, and then held a series of leadership positions in the think tank space. I love think tanks. I love the opportunity to delve deep into policy issues. I love researching policy. And IWPR had an opportunity and came to me and presented me with it, and here I am.
You know, just by the way, just a little cliff note here. What I love about you and this moment is when you look at the organization and 2 words just pop out at me, which is research and policy. And just like you, I'm a big policy nerd. I'm all about it. And I think most of the time our work has overlapped in Washington. But now that we're out of the Beltway, you and I know, but talk about why policy is so important and how it really impacts political culture.
Absolutely. You know, I think that policy is almost kind of like, it's sexy to us in the room here, right?
Yeah, I think it's really sexy.
But I do feel like too, you know, most people, you know, so living their day-to-day lives, trying to make ends meet, For some of them, policy is looked at as not a good thing because it isn't helping them advance and grow in their lives and support their families. And so for me, when we talk about particularly research to revolution, right, which is the theme of this conference, is really thinking about, to me, policy sort of fits within that revolution bucket, right? I feel like policy is also about action. And what we do at IWPR is really try to leverage the research base that we're building for evidence to advance policy solutions that will help women thrive, women and families thrive. So I think policy is a big part of how we advance the good in this country. I think with policy, it can be hard to stay focused and stay steadfast because it's an incremental game. I mean, some of us in the room have been working on these issues for decades. As I mentioned yesterday in my opening remarks, here IWPR is 40 years later and still working on some of the same policy issues. So it takes time. I can say for myself, I've definitely gotten discouraged. When the Dobbs leak happened, that was definitely a difficult moment for me. I can even share with you, I don't know if Nina Besser-Doyley from our team is in the room today, but at the time, and I hope she doesn't mind me sharing her story, but at the time when the Dobbs decision leaked, I was working at the Century Foundation, wonderful think tank with offices in DC and New York, leading their healthcare policy work, and the Dobbs decision leaked. And I remember calling up Nina, who at the time was the executive director of the Pro-Choice Caucus. And we had worked together for years. And, I just called her and I said, what are we going to do? It wasn't like we didn't know it was going to happen as a community, but it was just a gut punch. And it wasn't really about me or whether or not I was going to be able to access an abortion. It was about the women who weren't paying attention because they don't have time to pay attention, right? They're too busy leading their daily lives, taking care of the children that they already have. So that was a really difficult moment for me, and I questioned, can I continue to do this? So policy to me is also holding policymakers accountable, even the folks that are sitting on the Supreme Court. And I think it's such a critical moment for us to engage and stay engaged, and there are many ways that we can do that, right? Voting is a part of it, but also keeping abreast of the issues, the core issues that matter to you, matter to your family members, and holding your representation accountable. These folks work for us. And so when an issue comes up that's important to you, make those phone calls and hold them accountable.
And you touch upon something which is really important. So many people just feel like the entire world of policy is so inaccessible to them, and they don't really understand. And you really do have to, it really does test your strength when something like the Dobbs decision was leaked, and you just wonder, have I wasted my entire life? Like, is there any point to what I'm doing? But also, it's so important because there's such important pieces of legislation right now on the Hill. So talk to us a little bit about the Momnibus and what is going on with this major piece of legislation.
Absolutely. And so we heard a lot about the Black maternal health crisis yesterday from some of our speakers, Charles Johnson, Jonathan Webb, that wonderful panel from dads who were talking about their support of moms and being allies. And then we also heard about the statistics. Black women are 3 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related causes when compared to their white counterparts. And these are largely preventable deaths. This is an issue that is rooted in structural racism and inequality. It's rooted in the fact that, Black women tend to not be listened to by their healthcare providers. There are also access issues around healthcare. Then I also want to raise the fact that, the fall of Roe is also a factor here. We talked about Black women in Georgia dying because of abortion restrictions. Amber Thurman, who had an incomplete abortion and had gone to get emergency health care, was basically ignored and dismissed and ended up dying from sepsis. And that was a preventable death, right? And I think we're going to continue to see that. A maternal mortality review committee reviewed her death and was clear that it was a preventable death because she did not get the health care that she deserved. And so a lack of access to a safe abortion care is also a factor when we think about our maternal health crisis in this country. We are going to see the maternal health crisis worsen because of abortion restrictions in this country. So let me backtrack a little bit and talk about the Black Maternal Health Momnibus. You also heard, or you saw a video from Lauren Underwood yesterday. Lauren Underwood has led a piece of legislation called the Black Maternal Health Momnibus. It's a package of 13 bills that address various dimensions of the Black maternal health crisis, including the need for providers to be trained in implicit bias, supporting community-based healthcare workers, ensuring that women have access to quality, affordable healthcare, addressing the climate impacts of maternal health. So really just a comprehensive set of solutions. I do want to say that, when the Momnibus we first thought about the bill, I had the opportunity, the pleasure of working with Lauren Underwood on putting that bill together and actually drafting that legislation. So it's really great to see that it has had some traction. I think at this point, it's really acted as more of an organizing piece across the country. There are so many groups that are supporting the Momnibus, and then also you have some states that have introduced their own Momnibus bills. So we're in a good place, but we haven't yet had the political will to pass a piece of legislation like that. So it is going to be something that we're going to continue to think through and advocate for. I think educate policymakers on, particularly to bring in these connections between lack of abortion care and access and the maternal health crisis.
And yes, well, let's have a round of applause for that. Well, you touch upon something very interesting, which is how America's maternal health crisis obviously has a major racial force that is driving the massive disparities. But then when you are in the policy world, it can look so white, much like women's health in America. It has such a white image, but you look at the statistics and the stories, and they really belong to women of color and Black women who are going to be paying and are paying the highest price. Something I really love about your career is how you were there from the get-go. We have been in so many really white halls together, and I would just look around and be like, oh my goodness.
The only two in the room.
Yeah, there's like, yeah, but I would be like, is there anyone else? And I would see Jamila somewhere there. So talk about, besides the doom and gloom, I'm very, very hopeful about women's health and the women's health movement. Talk to us a little bit about how the scene has changed, how the colors have changed on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, I think things have changed to a certain extent, but we have a long way to go. I do want to say that, I feel like you're aging us a little bit with all that.
This was just last year. It wasn't back in the day.
Yeah, but I feel like you and I met, I had just left the Hill. This was a long time ago.
Before our kids.
Yeah, my son is 19 and he's a sophomore in college. So I feel like, he was, I left the Hill and he was still, a toddler. So this is a long time ago.
Thanks for really aging us. I was going to let it slide.
A little bit. I think things are changing in terms of, you are seeing more Black women and women of color, I think, leading not only in movement work around this issue, but also doing outreach and working in states when it comes to advancing these issues. I do feel like, sort of the DC policy bubble is still not as diverse as I would like it to be. There are oftentimes you're still in rooms where you're the only, and that feels really difficult to swallow, especially after over 2 decades working in Washington as a policy professional. So I think we have a lot of more work to do. And I also want to take a step back and talk about the work that I think all of us are responsible for doing in terms of opening doors and creating opportunities, calling women of color in, Black women in when it comes to working on policy, because it can be very territorial too. I have plenty of stories, even coming from the Hill as a seasoned staffer, working in these sort of predominantly white policy spaces where I wasn't always welcome to the table, or just didn't have a warm response to me being there, even as a veteran from the Hill. And so I think one thing is about opening the doors and creating opportunities, but then how are we calling people in when they're at the table? Mm-hmm. How do we encourage the development of new ideas and their contributions to the space? I think that is something that we often miss out when we talk about diversity and promoting diversity. When we get to the table, how are we treated when we're at the table? That's a really important piece that I think we forget too often.
What would you say to other women of color? Because I mean, you think you have success is not a destination. I wish somebody had told me this maybe 25 years ago. But really, once you are at a level that you've wanted to go to, will you be able to take, I mean, high school bullying really doesn't end. It'll be a different kind of bullying. It'll be legislative bullying or corporate bullying. And it's unique for women of color because often you will find yourself in a situation, which happens to me a lot, where I'm like, is this racist or is this sexist or is this both? And oftentimes it will be both.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think mentorship is really important. It's also something that can be a challenge to sort of like seek out as a young professional. You know, you're afraid of getting a no if you reach out to someone and ask for mentorship. It also takes dedication, I think, to your own growth as a professional. And it's going to take time. I think have grace with yourself is also a big piece of it. You're not going to go into these coalition spaces and have all of the answers, and you shouldn't feel the pressure to do so. I think that's another piece of it. And then find and build community. I mean, even as a CEO, as a Black woman, it's been really important for me to find community with people like Fatima Goss-Grays, with Jocelyn Fry, and other Black women that are leading organizations, particularly predominantly white organizations. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to find community. I feel like you hear all of this talk about you need to get a coach for this and you need to get a coach for that. And coaches are important. They're helpful. I have an executive coach myself who's fantastic. Yeah. But it's also important to have community. Sometimes you just need to get in the group chat and vent or ask a question to people that you trust and they aren't going to judge you because you didn't know the answer. So I would give that advice as well.
Yeah, definitely have a group thread about being mansplained reproductive rights.
This is true.
To you on the Hill. Of course, we are in the midst of the most important election for reproductive rights in our lifetime in a 501c3 friendly way. What would you like to say? Because has the choice ever been so clear between, first of all, if anybody doubted anything about the politics of women's health, it's true. It's political. What would you like to say?
Well, first off, IWPR is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We do not endorse political candidates. We will work with anyone across the aisle that is willing to work with us. But yes, this is, I feel like we say with every election, it's the most consequential election of our generation, but it really is. It really is. I feel like, I remember in a group chat with girlfriends, actually, when, first it was obviously President Biden's statement that, he was going to be stepping out of the race, and then the endorsement of Vice President Harris right after. And I remember being in a group chat with girlfriends, just at that point, it was just like, wow, this is happening, but also a lot of, just the moment that we're in and how it's a very different time. And one of the things that I have paid attention to with this election cycle is how fired up women are. I haven't, in my lifetime, I haven't seen women fired up in this way. I haven't seen women engaged in this way. Women are angry, especially when it comes to issues around reproductive rights and justice. And so I am looking forward to seeing women show up and vote in their interests which I think the last presidential election, well, before the last before the last, women did not vote in their interest. And so I think this has been like a wake-up call, everything that's happening. So I'm encouraged in this moment, but also know that the work is not done. Whatever happens in November, it's going to be on all of us to ensure that we have a thriving economy for women, and that we ensure that women have access to the health care that they deserve.
Well, it's so great. Well, yes, what she said. It's so great that American women are kind of, I feel like, collectively waking up, because I mean, we work in the space, but it's just been headline after headline and death after death. And it's like, how can we make people not forget that behind these numbers and behind these statistics are real women? This is what I always try to really stress in my work, because their death matters. Every woman's life matters. And we hear so much about, she was someone's wife and sister and daughter. And I always like to say, well, she was somebody. She was someone herself. And you touched upon this yesterday, and just in general, it's so important. But talk to us about the importance of storytelling in policy formulation.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I love that you brought in the comment about, you know, she was somebody. And I want to bring Charles back into the room, Charles Johnson, who was on the panel yesterday. And he didn't share a lot about his own story. And I encourage folks to Google him and read about the tragic story of his wife, Kira, passing away. But I bring Charles into the room and Kira into the room because one of the things that I appreciate about Charles, and we can all tell that he is a feminist and an ally. He not only talks about Kira as a mom, he also talks about her as a trained pilot, and he talks about her character and her career, and you know, really just, I think, a broader look at who she was as a person. Obviously, you know, being a mom was an important piece of this, but also just talking about the accolades and honoring her in that way. So I do want to bring that into the room. And yeah, storytelling is really important. I think, you know, for IWPR as a research organization, we are thinking about how to build storytelling more into the work that we do. And not only it being on a page and like a text or a pull-out box, but how do we really raise the profile and lift up the voices of women and people that we're centering in our work? So it's also about elevating the storytellers in a way. And then also too, the storytellers are also experts, right? You know, I'm not sitting next to a person that's telling their story, and you know, I'm sort of being touted as the expert, but they aren't. It's just like, well, this is a storyteller. This happened to this woman or this person. No, they are an expert too. Mm-hmm. They are bigger experts than we are, you know. And so really being thoughtful about that and honoring those stories. I think we have to be careful too, as you know, particularly these bigger organizations and going into communities, and, you know, so much of a focus being on collecting the story for us to advance our own goals. And that is a no-no. We should not be doing that. You know, any sort of effort or strategy to collect stories should really be centered around the voices of the stories that we're, you know, being asked to engage with. And so I do want to be clear about that.
Yeah, that is such an important point. Well, I could talk to you forever, and I have talked to her forever. But I would love to open it up for Q&A. But I do have one last question, which is, what are you looking ahead for IWPR? What is the organization working on? Whether or not who we want ends up in the White House or not.
Yeah, well, obviously, look, like I said, IWPR has been around for almost 40 years, so we're keeping the train moving, and so I think the issues that I want to lift up that are I think in the forefront of the minds of this national conversation, because we're a multi-issue organization, we're working on a lot of things, you know, but obviously we will continue to drive forth the message around the need for a national paid leave policy. Yes, and we will continue to do research to support that. I think another piece too is obviously, you know, advancing reproductive rights and justice. You know, IWPR actually recently released research that shows that the economic impacts of these abortion bans cost the United States $68 billion annually. And so that continues to be a piece of information that is resonating, I think, with decision makers and the media, to be quite honest. So we will keep building an evidence base for advancing abortion rights in this country. And then obviously closing the gender pay gap. We talked about how, women are earning 82.7 cents on the dollar for what men earn. For women, it's 66 cents. This is crazy, crazy. And we're not on track to close that gap until 2088. It doesn't make any sense. And so IWPR will continue to ring the alarm on closing the gender pay gap. But there are so many things that we're focused on, and we hope that you all stay engaged with us, and then also leverage our research for your own needs and advocacy efforts as well.
Yes, always back up your advocacy with facts and research.
Evidence-based. Evidence-based.
Evidence-based, yes, please.
Yes. And then one thing that I also want to flag too is that I'm really excited about this, is that we're going to be releasing our first ever federal policy agenda early next year. Yes.
That's amazing.
Yes. We're really excited about it.
Oh my goodness.
And so no matter what happens in November, again, we will continue to ring the alarm on these issues and continue to advocate to, advance economic equity for all women.
Well, that is a plan I can definitely get on board with.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Well, thank you for having us.